Welcome. Thanks for sharing your sources with us. Tonight, we're digging into something really atmospheric.
Definitely has that vibe. We're heading into the Canadian North, virtually speaking.
Exactly. We've got a YouTube transcript, a Skeptoid article, and one from Brightside, all circling around this enduring mystery, the Anjikuni Lake disappearances.
Ah, yes, the Village of the Dead. It's one of those stories that just, sticks with you. Almost mythical.
It really is. Nearly 100 years old and still a puzzle.
Yeah.
So the big question, what actually happened to that Inuit village back in 1930?
Well, let's dive into what our sources say. Our goal here isn't necessarily to solve it definitively, probably impossible now, but to really explore the story itself, how it's been told, and what we can piece together from these different accounts.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with that YouTube transcript from Mind-Blowing Tales. It kicks things off with a news clipping, right? November 26, 1930.
Yeah, the Meriden Daily Journal. And that headline, Village of the Dead. Pretty stark.
Right. Sets the tone immediately. So the story it lays out is this. A remote Inuit community, maybe 100, 150 people, living by Anjikuni Lake, way up north in Canada.
Super isolated, fishing, hunting, living off the land in this pretty harsh climate. Not many people around up there.
And into this scene walks a hunter, Joe LaBelle. It's November 1930. He's hunting late, needs a place to stay.
And he knows this village, apparently, expects a welcome, somewhere familiar.
But as he gets closer, silence. Just unnerving quiet, no dogs barking, which is weird in itself.
Yeah, you'd expect noise, activity, but he sees smoke rising from some tents, so someone should be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But no one. He goes in, finds the village completely empty, deserted.
And the details here are what make it so creepy. It's like time just stopped.
Totally. Cooking pots with food still in them, but burned. Sewing projects just left, like mid-stitch, belongings scattered around.
It suggests whatever happened fast. Like incredibly abruptly. People didn't pack, didn't prepare, they just went.
And then there are the dogs, the sled dogs, tied up, dead, starved apparently, even though there was food nearby.
That detail is just chilling. Why wouldn't they break free? And didn't the source mention a grave?
Yeah, a freshly dug grave. Adds another layer of mystery. So LaBelle is obviously freaked out. He heads to the nearest telegraph office, a journey in itself back then, and calls the RCMP the Mounties.
And the Mounties come out to investigate.
Right. And according to this first account, they basically confirm everything LaBelle saw. Empty village, signs of sudden departure.
And crucially, no signs of a struggle. No blood, no violence indicated.
None reported in this version. But the killer detail, the one that really makes it baffling, no footprints in the snow, except LaBelle's own.
Wait, 100+ people vanish in the snow and leave no tracks? How is that even possible?
That's the core of the mystery, isn't it? The lake's frozen, the boats are beached. Where could they go and how?
So the police, in this account, they estimate it happened maybe 8 days before LaBelle arrived, based on the dogs.
That's what the transcript suggests. And from there, well, it becomes an unsolved case, a ghost village.
Wow. Okay, that's a compelling, if completely baffling story to start with. It sets up this perfect enigma.
It really does. But the Mind-Blowing Tales video doesn't stop there. It brings in another element.
Whoa. Where does it go next?
Well, it mentions a later article from 1984 by Roger Bohr and Nigel Blundell, and they connect the dots to aliens.
Okay. The UFO angle. That often comes up with unexplained disappearances.
Yeah, this 1984 article apparently talks about a hunter and his sons who supposedly saw strange flying objects over the lake heading towards the village around the same time.
So the theory is aliens landed and abducted the entire village.
That's the gist of it. The video does say there's no real proof and it wasn't widely accepted, but it's part of the legend now, how the story evolved.
It shows how people try to fill the vacuum when there's no clear answer. The more mysterious something is, the more extraordinary the explanations can become.
Especially after decades pass. Nearly 100 years, and this alien theory is still floating around as one possible explanation, however fringe.
Okay, so we have the initial chilling discovery and then this later extraterrestrial layer added on. What about the other sources?
Right, let's switch gears. The Skeptoid article takes a very different approach. It kind of puts the brakes on and asks, hang on, is this even real?
Skeptical, as the name implies.
Exactly. It frames the whole thing as potentially simple pulp fiction, basically questioning if the story has any factual basis at all. It follows Brian Dunning's investigation into the story's origins.
So Skeptoid starts by recapping the popular version, the Joe LaBelle story we just discussed, Trapper, Empty Village, November 1930, all the eerie details.
Yes, and it points to a key early source that popularized this version. Frank Edwards' 1959 book, Stranger Than Science.
Okay, 1959, that's almost 30 years after the supposed event.
Right. And Edwards' account has the RCMP confirming LaBelle, no trace of villagers, kayaks on the beach, frozen dogs, all the classic elements. But Dunning starts picking it apart.
How so? What inconsistencies does he find?
Well, practical stuff, like kayaks in November on an inland lake like Anjikuni.
Yeah, wouldn't the water be freezing or frozen? And where would they even get the materials? Like sealskin, way inland, willow maybe, but it seems a bit off.
That's the point Dunning raises. And the size of the village, Edwards says, friendly little Eskimo village, maybe 30 people, but other versions, including the one we heard first, say 100, 150. And the RCMP apparently said later a village that big was unlikely way out there.
So contradictions in the details even in these early popular accounts. What about clothing?
Another point? The story mentions sealskin clothing left behind. But Skeptoid notes that area was more known for caribou hide use. Little details, but they add up, suggesting the story might be, well, embellished or inaccurate.
These inconsistencies definitely raise red flags about the factual accuracy. It smells a bit like a story getting embroidered over time.
So Skeptoid digs deeper, looking for actual documentation. The earliest publication they tracked down is cited in a 1976 article. It points to a piece in the Halifax Herald from November 29, 1930, by a writer named Emmett E. Kelleher.
Okay, so just days after the supposed discovery by LaBelle, what did that first article say?
Interestingly, it mentioned a much smaller population, just 25 people, and fewer details about abandoned artifacts. So even the earliest known printed version differs significantly from the later, more famous accounts.
That suggests the story was changing right from the start. Fewer people, fewer dramatic details.
And then Skeptoid brings up what seems like a really crucial piece, an RCMP investigation. Apparently, the commissioner, Cortlandt Starnes, had Sergeant J. Nelson look into it back in 1931.
Ah, okay. Official investigation. What did Sergeant Nelson find?
Well, according to Skeptoid, Nelson found that Joe LaBelle wasn't even in the Anjikuni area. He was supposedly working way over in northern Manitoba.
Oh, that's significant. What else?
The photo Kelleher used in his article, apparently just an old stock photo from RCMP archives, not related to any recent event. And Nelson reported that nobody locally knew anything about a missing village or this disappearance.
Wow, so no corroboration on the ground.
None.
But
Nelson's conclusion, reported by Skeptoid, was that Kelleher basically made it up. A sensationalized story, a hoax.
So the RCMP, according to this, investigated almost immediately and concluded it was likely fiction. That fundamentally changes things.
It really does. And then, after that 1931 report, Skeptoid points out, the story seems to just disappear from print for almost 3 decades.
28 years of silence until Frank Edwards' book in 1959.
Exactly. And Edwards' book, which reignited the story, apparently didn't cite Kelleher's article or Nelson's debunking report. It just presented the dramatic version.
Which makes you wonder where Edwards got his version from if the original report was deemed a hoax so early on. Maybe just repeating Kelleher's story without checking.
Possibly. Then, fast forward to 1976, Dwight Whalen writes an article for Fate magazine called Vanished Village Revisited.
Fate magazine, okay. They cover a lot of paranormal and unexplained stuff.
Right. Whalen mentions the earlier Kelleher article. But he also says that when he contacted the RCMP in the 70s, they had no record of the event at all.
Wait, no record? What about Sergeant Nelson's 1931 report that supposedly debunked it?
That's the inconsistency Whalen noted, according to Skeptoid. Despite Nelson allegedly investigating, the RCMP in the 70s seemingly had no file on it. Whalen's conclusion, though, was similar to Nelson's supposed one. Kelleher probably invented most of it.
So by the 70s, the picture's getting murky. An early report possibly debunked, but then no official record of the debunking later. Still, the consensus seems to be leaning towards fabrication.
But then it takes, as Skeptoid says, a weird turn.
Oh boy, what now?
1977. Betty Hill, famous from the Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction case, writes a letter to Fate. She claims an RCMP captain, Captain Larson, did investigate Anjikuni and supposedly believed UFOs were involved.
Ah, so the UFO angle resurfaces, this time linked to an alleged but previously unmentioned RCMP investigator who supposedly believed it.
Seems like it. And from that point on, Skeptoid suggests UFO writers really ran with the Anjikuni story.
Like Blundell and Bohr, the ones mentioned in the YouTube source.
Yep. Their 1983 book apparently inflated the village population to 1,200, which is huge for that area, and added the detail about 3 trappers seeing UFOs, not just one hunter and his sons. And LaBelle using a telegraph, which Skeptoid points out was geographically unlikely.
So the story just kept growing. More people, more witnesses, more impossible details, like a snowball effect.
Exactly, and it didn't stop. Later retellings mentioned emptied graves. A 2001 article on rents.com apparently claimed 2,000 villagers vanished, and the dogs were found buried under 12 feet of snow.
Okay, that's just getting absurd. 2,000 people, 12 feet of snow burial. It's clearly moved into pure fantasy territory by then.
It really highlights how these stories can mutate wildly over time, losing any connection to potential reality.
So what about the Skeptoid author's own attempt to verify the very first sources? Did they find that Kelleher article?
They did. But interestingly, not in the Halifax Herald as often cited, but in a newspaper called The Bee from Danville, Virginia, of all places.
Virginia, not even Canada.
Nope. So an early article exists, confirming that much, but the citation trail was messy, and its actual location adds another layer of strangeness. Finding the supposed 1931 RCMP report, however, proved difficult for them.
So the primary debunking document is elusive, but what about institutional memory?
This might be the most crucial bit from Skeptoid. They contacted an RCMP historian, S.W. Horrell, back in 1988. Horrell spoke to retired Mounties who served in that region during the 1930s.
What did they remember?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing about an entire village disappearing. They were apparently astonished the story was believed at all.
Wow. If anyone should have known.
Exactly. And Horrell confirmed a detailed search of RCMP files, found 0 records of Joe LaBelle's report, strange aircraft sightings, search parties, anything related to the Anjikuni story.
No official trace whatsoever.
The only things in the files were letters from the RCMP to people asking about it, stating the story was fictitious.
That seems pretty definitive, coming from the RCMP's own historian and archives.
It carries a lot of weight. So Skeptoid's conclusion is basically that Frank Edwards' 1959 book is likely the real origin of the popular legend, drawing perhaps on Kelleher's likely fictional 1930 article and ignoring or unaware of the early internal RCMP view that it was a hoax.
So the mystery might not be a disappearance, but the creation and persistence of a piece of folklore.
That seems to be the strong implication from the Skeptoid analysis. Now, just quickly, that third source, the Brightside article.
How does that one fit in?
It mostly retells the dramatic Joe LaBelle version, much like the YouTube source. Lack of tracks, dead dogs, empty grave with undisturbed stones.
Just sticking to the classic narrative.
Yeah, and it even includes those later embellishments like the police seeing unusual blue lights and other hunters seeing flying objects, leaning into the alien theory again.
So it doesn't seem to incorporate the skeptical findings or the RCMP's lack of records.
Not really. It mentions some skepticism, like about LaBelle's hunting license, but kind of brushes past it. It does acknowledge it's hard to verify the original sources, which, our look at Skeptoid definitely confirms.
Fair enough. Does it add anything else?
Just briefly mentions other ghost village stories, like Koltara in India or one on Achill Island in Ireland, sort of framing Anjikuni as part of a global phenomenon of unexplained abandonments.
Which taps into that universal fascination with sudden disappearances, but doesn't necessarily prove anything about Anjikuni itself.
Exactly. So quite a ride through these sources, from chilling initial mystery to possible alien abduction, then a deep dive suggesting it might all be elaborate fiction.
When you put it all together, especially the Skeptoid investigation and the lack of any RCMP corroboration, in fact, their explicit denial, it really does seem the most likely answer is that the mass disappearance, as described, probably didn't happen.
It feels more like a story that took on a life of its own, maybe inspired by Kelleher's original, possibly fabricated article, then amplified by Edwards, and then just, growing wilder with UFO writers and internet retellings.
It's a fascinating case study in how legends are born and evolve. That human need for a story, especially a mysterious one, can be incredibly powerful.
And it really underscores the need for critical thinking, doesn't it? Going back to the sources, questioning the details, looking for actual evidence, like Dunning did.
Absolutely. It's easy to get swept up in a spooky story, but digging into where the story came from is often just as interesting, if not more so.
So wrapping this up, even if we lean towards the conclusion that the Anjikuni Lake vanishing, this mass disappearance event, is more folklore than fact, it still makes you wonder, right?
What do you mean?
Well, what was the initial kernel? Could Kelleher's story, even if exaggerated, have been sparked by something, a smaller group moving unexpectedly? a misunderstanding? Or was it pure invention from day one?
That's the lingering question, isn't it? If it wasn't a mass vanishing, what tiny seed might have grown into this enduring legend?
And maybe the real mystery isn't even what happened or didn't happen at the lake in 1930. Maybe the mystery is why this particular story resonates so strongly, why we're still talking about it almost a century later. What does that fascination tell us about how we grapple with the unknown? Is the enduring mystery simply the power of the story itself?